Doppelganger. The doppelganger has no clear origin story, no transformation event, and no moment where a human becomes something else, because it exists as a contradiction from the beginning rather than a result of change. It simply appears. You do not summon it, and you do not seek it out, because encounters are described as accidental, often occurring in reflections, in empty spaces, or in places where only one version of you should exist. At first, nothing is wrong, and that is precisely what makes it dangerous, because recognition depends on difference, and the doppelganger removes that difference entirely. It behaves correctly, exactly correctly. Its function is not to harm you physically, but to occupy your identity so completely that the system no longer requires your original presence. Two identical identities cannot coexist within the same structure without conflict, and mythology resolves that conflict by removing one of them. There are no clear rules to exploit, no conditions to break, and no consistent weaknesses, because the threat is not physical but informational, operating at the level of identity rather than body. And once it appears, there is no escalation you can observe, only continuation. Because the replacement does not need a moment of attack. It only needs to persist. Changeling. The changeling begins with a deliberate act of substitution, where a human child is taken and replaced by something that resembles it closely enough to pass initial recognition, but not perfectly enough to remain undetected forever. You do not encounter a changeling by searching for it, because the encounter occurs within the most trusted system possible, the home. It is already there. At first, it appears normal, which is required for the system to function, because if recognition fails immediately, the replacement collapses. But over time, the differences begin to emerge. Subtly, then repeatedly. Its behavior becomes inconsistent with expectation, showing patterns that are excessive, unnatural, or misaligned with human development. The function of the changeling is not instant replacement, but gradual destabilization, where doubt replaces certainty and recognition becomes unreliable. There are rules, but they are indirect. The changeling must maintain enough similarity to remain accepted, but it does not need perfection, because imperfection creates confusion rather than rejection. Some methods exist to expose it. Iron, heat, deception. But these methods depend on suspicion forming early enough to matter. And it rarely does. Because by the time something feels wrong, the system has already adapted to the replacement. And the original is no longer part of it. Skinwalker. The skinwalker does not originate as a creature, but as a human who has made a deliberate choice to cross a boundary that cannot be reversed, transforming through ritual and intention rather than accident or punishment. You encounter it through familiarity, not isolation, because it appears as someone you already know, or someone who fits perfectly into your environment without triggering suspicion. It feels normal. That is the entry point. Its function is controlled transformation, allowing it to move between identities and forms depending on context, which makes it fundamentally unstable and difficult to predict. The rules are fluid, because the skinwalker determines when and how the change occurs, removing any fixed pattern that could be used to detect it consistently. At first, it observes. Then it imitates. Then it inserts itself. The escalation is quiet but precise, moving from distance to interaction without triggering immediate alarm. There are signs, small ones. Behavioral inconsistencies, unnatural movements, subtle errors in timing or reaction. But these are easy to ignore, and that is enough. Because the skinwalker does not need long-term replacement, only access. Black-eyed children. The black-eyed children do not begin with transformation or origin in the traditional sense, but with a condition that defines every interaction. They must be allowed in. You encounter them at thresholds, in places that separate safety from exposure, such as doorways, windows, or isolated points where the boundary between inside and outside can be crossed. They appear as children. That matters, because children reduce perceived threat. But something is wrong immediately. The eyes, completely black. No variation. No depth. First contact is controlled and structured, beginning with a polite request to enter, delivered in a voice that lacks normal emotional variation. They ask, and they wait. Their function is not force, but consent, which is far more effective because it shifts responsibility to the victim. The rules are strict. They cannot enter without permission, but they will not leave easily. They repeat the request, again and again. Escalation is psychological, building pressure through repetition and presence rather than action, creating a situation where refusal becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. There is a way to stop it. Refuse. Do not engage. But that requires certainty. And certainty is exactly what they remove. If you allow them inside, the system changes immediately. And after that point, there are no reliable accounts. Which suggests something final. Kitsune. The kitsune originates as a fox that gains the ability to transform over time, not through punishment, but through accumulation of age, intelligence, and power, which allows it to take on human form with increasing precision. You encounter it in ordinary life because its strength lies in integration rather than disruption, appearing as a person who fits perfectly into your environment without drawing attention. There is no warning. First contact is seamless. Its function is long-term replacement within social systems, where it builds relationships, trust, and identity over extended periods of time. The rules are strict but fragile. The illusion must be maintained continuously, because even small inconsistencies can expose it. And perfection is difficult. Eventually, something slips. A reflection that does not match. A shadow that behaves incorrectly. A moment where attention breaks. Escalation is not aggressive but cumulative, where the longer it remains, the more likely failure becomes. The weakness is exposure. Once seen, the system collapses instantly. It leaves. Immediately. Without attempting to recover. Because without the illusion, the replacement cannot continue. Conclusion. These creatures differ in origin, in method, and in the systems they operate within, but they all follow a consistent structural pattern that defines their role in mythology. A human identity is established. A condition is met, and something else takes its place. Sometimes gradually, through integration and trust, and sometimes instantly, through contradiction and collapse. But always without requiring destruction. Because destruction is visible. Replacement is not. And once something else can exist within your role, behave within your patterns, and continue within your system without interruption, then the question is no longer whether these creatures exist. It is whether the system you trust is capable of detecting them, or if it was never designed to.